I never expected a quiet cul-de-sac to turn into chaos, until Karen stormed out, screaming at the top of her lungs that I had stolen her car. The neighbors were watching, cameras were rolling, and the HOA's petty rules had been tightening like a noose for weeks. Little did she know, I wasn't just any resident. I was undercover, observing every move, every tantrum, every ridiculous claim. But how far would she go before the truth came crashing down? And what would happen when her world collided with mine in a way she could never imagine? Life in Maplewood Estates had always seemed picture-perfect. White picket fences, neatly trimmed lawns, and neighbors who nodded politely as you passed by. I had moved here for the quiet, the sense of community, and the promise of stability. My mornings were filled with coffee on the porch, the distant laughter of kids playing, and the occasional friendly wave from Mrs. Patel next door. Evenings were peaceful, sometimes spent reading, other times tending to my small garden, a little oasis in a world that often felt chaotic, almost idyllic. But as anyone who's lived under the strict thumb of an HOA knows, perfection is fragile. It starts with small things. A notice about a crooked mailbox, a complaint about a minor parking violation, whispers about your landscaping choices. I had brushed these off at first, laughing at the pettiness. But there was one neighbor, Karen, whose complaints always seemed to carry an unusual weight, as if the rules of the community existed to serve her alone. Didn't realize it yet, but her watchful eyes and constant meddling were quietly setting the stage for a storm. What started as a few harmless notices and a few eye rolls at HOA meetings was about to spiral into something far bigger, something that would turn my quiet life upside down and make the entire neighborhood a stage for her outrageous theatrics. By the time she came screaming that I had stolen her car, the tension had been simmering for weeks, unnoticed by everyone else but me. And I knew deep down that this wasn't just another petty dispute. Something was about to snap, and I was right in the middle of it. Life in Maplewood Estates had always demanded attention to detail, but I quickly realized the HOA didn't just value appearances, they demanded control. My first warning came in the form of a thin envelope slipped under my door. The letter, printed with the HOA's seal, accused me of improper landscaping alignment and threatened a fine. It was absurd. My garden had been immaculate for years. Yet, under the HOA's microscope, even a crooked edging stone could spark punishment. I tucked the letter away, telling myself it was just bureaucracy, but it was the first hint of the relentless storm about to hit. Karen, of course, was right there to escalate things. She began showing up unannounced, peering over fences, and snapping photos of anything she considered suspicious. One afternoon, she called the board about a single bicycle leaning against my garage door. The complaint? It's an eyesore. The HOA responded instantly, sending a notice demanding immediate removal. I laughed it off, but the laughter was nervous. Each complaint, no matter how trivial, came with a ticking clock, 48 hours to comply, or face fines that quickly ballooned into hundreds of dollars. It wasn't just about rules. It was about control. Every interaction felt like navigating a minefield. One morning, I discovered bright orange stickers plastered on my trash bins, another violation notice. According to the HOA, the bins were too close to the curb and unsightly when visible from the street. Neighbors looked on, some trying to hide smirks, others feigning ignorance. But I knew Karen was watching from her window, gloating quietly as the notices piled up. The tension escalated further when a neighborhood meeting was called. HOA board members, always polite in public, began interrogating me over the bicycle incident. Karen chimed in with exaggerated concern, describing my alleged transgressions as if they were criminal acts. The air was thick with judgment, whispers ricocheting across the room. I left the meeting with a pit in my stomach, realizing this wasn't about rules anymore. It was about power, and Karen was wielding it like a weapon. Days turned into weeks. Notices turned into fines. Fines turned into threats of legal action. I had meticulously documented everything, every email, every photo, every witness. But even with evidence, it felt like fighting an invisible force that had eyes everywhere. I tried to reach out diplomatically, explaining that my garden was in compliance, that the bins were properly placed, and that the bicycle was harmless. but each message was met with cold, bureaucratic repetition of the rules, and Karen's satisfaction seemed to grow with every reply. Then came the tipping point. One morning, I returned from a short grocery run to find a brand new violation notice. My car, legally parked in my driveway, was now in violation of HOA guidelines on permitted vehicle types and locations. My blood ran cold. This wasn't about fairness anymore. This was personal. Karen had flagged my vehicle, and the HOA blindly followed her lead. I realized in that moment that I had underestimated how far she was willing to go and how little the board cared about common sense. Frustration and anger boiled inside me. I considered every possible response: legal action, confrontation, documenting everything secretly, but I had to stay calm. Every move I made was being scrutinized. Every eye in the neighborhood seemed trained on me. The tension became suffocating. The once peaceful cul-de-sac now a stage for petty tyranny. It was during one of these tense weeks that Karen took things to a level I hadn't anticipated. She claimed that I had tampered with her mailbox, though I had never even touched it. A formal complaint was filed with the HOA, complete with photos she had captured through binoculars from her window. The board predictably issued a stern warning, threatening further fines and legal consequences. My neighbors whispered as I walked by, some expressing sympathy, others curious amusement. I knew this was all part of her plan, to make me appear reckless, to justify her obsession. As the days dragged on, Karen's antics grew more extreme. She began documenting my comings and goings, noting every vehicle that stopped by, timing my garbage can's placement down to the minute. The HOA notices became a blur, arriving with alarming frequency, each one more absurd than the last. My mailbox overflowed with threats of penalties, and my emails flooded with bureaucratic nonsense. I realized I was trapped in a system designed to protect appearances while crushing individuality. And then came the day she screamed that I had stolen her car. The climax of weeks of harassment, the culmination of petty obsession, and the point where normalcy shattered entirely. But she had no idea. I wasn't just reacting to her madness. I was watching, documenting, and preparing. Every violation, every fine, every whispered complaint had been part of the build-up to something far greater, something that would expose the absurdity of her power and the fragility of her control. The day Karen screamed that I had stolen her car was the breaking point. The neighborhood gathered, some curious, some horrified, as her shrill accusations echoed down the cul-de-sac. The HOA, predictably, arrived minutes later, clipboards in hand, faces set in rigid authority. I could feel the weight of weeks of harassment pressing down. The absurdity of the rules, the petty complaints, all leading to this public spectacle. But I wasn't just any homeowner. Every move, every tantrum, and every false accusation had been observed, documented, and recorded. Hidden cameras, meticulous logs, and legal preparation had transformed my frustration into a weapon. As Karen raged, pointing fingers and waving evidence-free claims, I calmly stepped forward, revealing the truth to the stunned onlookers. I wasn't merely a resident, I was an undercover investigator, assigned to observe HOA abuses and document fraudulent claims. Gasps filled the street. Neighbors who had whispered about my eccentric behavior now watched as the tables turned. Karen's face drained of color. Her claims crumbled under the weight of undeniable proof. Emails, videos, timestamps, all perfectly aligned to expose her obsession, manipulation, and the excessive reach of her power. The HOA, caught in their blind enforcement, had no choice but to retract their threats. Karen tried to argue, to twist the narrative, but the community now saw the pattern. A neighbor abusing the rules for a personal vendetta. Her public humiliation was complete, her credibility shattered. For the first time, silence fell over the street. Not the peaceful kind, but one of stunned realization. Yet, as victorious as I felt, there was a lingering question. How many others had suffered under the same petty tyranny, unseen and unheard? The climax wasn't just about vindication. It was a mirror reflecting the absurdity of unchecked power and a warning that even the quietest streets can hide explosive secrets. And as Karen stormed off, red-faced and defeated, I knew this confrontation was over, but the impact of it would ripple through Maplewood Estates for years to come. After the explosive confrontation, the street was quiet in a way that felt almost unreal. Neighbors peeked cautiously from behind curtains and hedges, unsure whether the chaos was truly over. Karen had retreated to her home, slamming doors and muttering under her breath, her authority thoroughly dismantled. The HOA board members shuffled awkwardly, avoiding eye contact, fully aware that their rigid enforcement and blind allegiance to her complaints had backfired spectacularly. For weeks, I had walked a tightrope, documenting every violation notice, every petty complaint, every intrusive action Karen had conducted. All of it had led to this moment, undeniable proof of her obsession and the HOA's unreasonable power. Yet even in victory, the relief was tempered with reflection. I realized that the quiet, orderly life I had sought in Maplewood Estates was a fragile illusion. Beneath manicured lawns and friendly nods, small tyrannies had been quietly thriving, and many neighbors had suffered in silence, afraid to speak out. Immediately after the confrontation, the HOA held a meeting, this time one focused on reform rather than blind enforcement. With evidence in hand, I presented the documented harassment, the chain of baseless fines, and the invasive monitoring Karen had conducted. For the first time, the board members were forced to confront the consequences of their passive complicity. Policies were revisited, procedures rewritten, and mechanisms were introduced to prevent a single neighbor from wielding disproportionate influence. It was bureaucratic, yes, but necessary. A reset that would protect future residents from the same abuse. Karen's retaliation didn't last long. She sent a few angry letters, tried to rally neighbors, and made hollow threats, but her credibility was gone. The truth was out, and her supporters slowly drifted away. Her reign of control had ended. For me, life at Maplewood Estates changed too. I saw the neighborhood differently, no longer perfect, but human. People approached me with newfound respect, some apologetic, others curious. The HOA began to reform. Meetings became fair, rules gained purpose, and silence gave way to open voices. What was once fear had turned into accountability. The scars from Karen's harassment ran deep, but they taught me patience, resilience, and strategy. Justice, I learned, doesn't always come from power. It comes from preparation and truth. Karen's story became legend, a quiet warning whispered to new residents about ego and control. Maplewood Estates found peace again, but no one forgot what unchecked authority could do. As I watched the sun set behind my red Challenger, I realized this was never just about a car or a neighbor. It was about justice, courage, and reclaiming control over your own life. Because in every neighborhood, there's a Karen waiting, and a moment when silence must end.